Good morning and welcome to the Morning Porridge, October the 3rd, 2025. Today's topic, the death of democracy as markets jump higher. Let me as usual start with a quote. We've subordinated the public to profit. We've literally cooked the planet to create shareholder value, and we're wondering if democracy is the problem. Fascinating times we live in. Democracy is struggling. Nations are caught with crippling budgets, unpayable debt, and gridlocked political systems that mitigate against any effective solutions. Don't you just hanker for the good old days when the king could just lop off some heads to make things happen? Well, that's one solution, according to some. Now, what is the perfect government? The most effective form of government I've ever come across is the fictional city of Ankh-Morpork, the locus of the late Terry Pratchett's marvellous Discworld series. They are a work of comedic satirical genius. I only have to pick up one of his books and I start laughing. The city of Ankh-Morpork is ruled by its patrician, Lord Havelock Vetinari, who believes implicitly in the democratic concept of one man, one vote. Vetinari is that man, and he has that vote. His unlimited and unchallenged power and aura of menace, because he's a fully paid up member of the Assassin's Guild, means he is feared, but he is also a benevolent and effective ruler, tolerant of individual rights. At the same time, he exercises short, sharp, demonstratively brutal justice against anyone who would put their interests above those of his city. He maintains his power through stability and crowd control, persuading angry mobs carrying pitchforks that it's all the fault of the ones holding the torches. Pratchett probably based him on Machiavelli's Prince. Ankh-Morpork is chaotic, but the richest city on the disc, which of course rests on the shoulders of 4 elephants who ride the stars on the shell of an enormous star turtle. It's fiction, but back in the imaginary real world. Now, apologies to the many Morning Porridge readers who think I write and talk too much about politics, but it's regulations, rules, laws, and the confidence instilled by politicians that sets the base for the economy and ultimately the price of all markets. You can't put markets in context without understanding the underlying politics. Political competency is one element of national success. Wisely led nations tend to thrive. Foolish ones fail. Understanding how systems of government work and the influence they have on both the macro and microeconomy are critical factors in investment decisions. Now, November the 5th is going to be what we call an interesting day for markets. The US Supreme Court will opine on the legality of President Trump's tariffs. Did Trump have the authority to unilaterally use the excuse of an invented trade emergency to impose tariffs without the approval of Congress? It could be the biggest test yet of the US famed balancing system of checks and balances. Will Trump's Supreme Court support the man who appointed most of them, or will they let the legality of the case and the rules of the Constitution guide them to a non-partisan decision? It's pretty fundamental stuff. Should Trump win, it will confirm one of the key precepts of Project 2025. That's the libertarian blueprint for Trump's second presidency, and it's a move towards the establishment of an American monarchy. It will undermine the Constitution by establishing the precedence of the president above the palaver of checks and balances by this Congress or the courts. And this week, demonstrations against an American king are planned across the US by concerned Democrats who will be dismissed on X and other right-wing media as dangerous radical lefties. Now, the case could fundamentally reset American democracy, but will it impact markets? Well, maybe not in the short term. This week, stocks have rallied into the government shutdown, but long term, how will it impact the way commerce and finance works? I expect the future is going to look very different to the past we're still in, and it may be surprisingly strong for markets. Now, history illustrates how the last 250 years of industrial revolution, technical evolution, and wealth creation is largely due to capitalism, enabling entrepreneurship. Aside from 3 or 4 global wars, it all depends how you count them, the era has been one of mercantile expansion, political stability, at least in the UK and the USA, and the development of clear legal frameworks. We've seen rising health and wealth, democracy and freedom, and particularly the freedom to fail, which many describe as the secret sauce that flavours genius. The political debate during that time has largely been about more government versus less government. Taxes are viewed with horror by those expected to pay them, while austerity is an affront to those dependent on state handouts. There are a few details to observe, including a critical one, that regulation typically protects consumers and less regulation favours shareholders. The lesson is the need for balance. However, there is little balance in the current capitalist model. It seems to be breaking down, and the current US government shutdown is just one example. The increasing polarization between the parties, the gridlock around decisions, and the horse trading or pork barreling politics of government spending decisions simply doesn't work anymore. Wouldn't it just be better to slice through it all, cut through the Gordian knot of US politics, and let a competent CEO run America? Such things have happened before. After decades of internal conflict and growing corruption, the Roman Republic was replaced by the Empire. That was in much the same way as Congress could suddenly find itself as irrelevant as the Roman Senate. And we all know how honest, fair, and benign the emperors proved to be. Now, the default mode in Western history since the fall of Rome has been a central monarchy, which then allocated the resources of the nation to powerful nobles, who managed these resources in return for their homage to the king. The dance between these nobles and the throne is what historical dramas and fantasies like Game of Thrones are all about. The reality is the players in these worlds were driven by greed, power, avarice, and opportunities for personal advancement. Generally, the poor people, that's folk like us, were just the pawns. The concept of parliamentary representative democracy is a relatively new one. It only really became established after the English Civil War in the 1640s, when Sir Robert Walpole became the first Prime Minister in 1721. And the UK monarchy has largely evolved into its current constitutional and largely ceremonial form. Now, there are increasingly strong opinions being voiced by the libertarian right in America that our current system of democracy has reached its limit. Not only is decision-making by government gridlocked, but they blame weak governments for beggaring their nations through crippling welfare costs, high debt, high taxes, and the imposition of left-wing wokery, which has weakened the resilience of the people, at the same time as over-regulation of business has put private enterprise at a competitive disadvantage. And they all point to libertarian philosophies like Hayek to reverse economic decline and empower growth. They say it's time to find something better in politics. 30 years ago, no one would ever have suggested replacing democracy with autocracy. But today it's become a genuine debate. That Libertarian Project 2025 that I talked about wants to make America more effective, remove the polarization and gridlock in Washington by removing the politics. It's holding back the nation. And how do you do that? By putting a King of America in charge. Someone who can run the country properly without the damned interference of politics. Funnily enough, the gridlocked failure of democracy in Washington comes exactly at the point of time when the long-term economic cycle of hegemonic change is occurring. Now that happens every 120 years or so. We call it the K2 curve, K for Kondratiev 60-year cycles. China and Asia are challenging America to become the most powerful nations as the cycle reaches its current top. Such times are often a time of conflict, internal as well as external. The Americans, understandably, are looking for solutions on how to retain power, and it's no surprise America's failure is now being defined by its leaders and the observation that America is governed by lawyers while China is led by engineers. There is a circuit of talkers rather than doers on Capitol Hill. Now, what should the new America look like? Well, I was listening to the BBC's excellent Moral Maze Radio 4 programme the other night. The current episode is Democracy is a Failed Experiment. It's worth a listen. The main guest was the leading libertarian of the current age, Curtis Yavin, a man whose thinking on the need to replace democracy with modern monarchy dominates political thinking in the upper echelons of the Trump administration and across the dark alignment of tech barons and financiers. Think about Peter Thiel or Mark Andreessen there. Many see it as the only way that they can unblock America's sclerotic decision-making process in Washington and get the budget back under control and maintain global hegemony. Yarvin was the main witness on the programme. He's absolutely fascinating, in the same way an unfed tiger is. He dismissed democracy as a dead notion. He says we live in a managed democracy where public opinion is set, guided, and manipulated by the liberal elites, who are the media, academia, and he calls them the cathedral. I would counter by reminding him that most US media is owned by the right wing, and remind him who owns Twitter, X. He will say, what about the New York Times? Now, I suspect Curtis Yarvin has read all about the partition of Ankh-Morpork. Yarvin's plan, and he's worked it all out, is to replace democracy with a modern version of the monarchy. The king, for that's what we would likely get, holds power by the grace of a board who can control his access to the buttons of power. Naturally, this power will be enforced by a blockchain voting system among the barons who make up the board and supposedly control the king. And Yarvin expects the king and the board will act rationally and in the best public interest. The king will be motivated to ensure the board does not dismiss him, while the members of the board will act collegiately to ensure they aren't voted off. He reckons any decent Fortune 500 CEO would be able to do the job. I'd love to see Elon Musk have a go. That would be really interesting. But do you really believe that a king not subject to democratic control would be entirely rational? Yesterday, the Trump government sent a 10-point memo entitled The Compact for Academic Excellence to some of the leading US universities. It offered preferential access to federal funds if they sign up, the key proviso being they have to abolish any course that punishes or belittles conservative ideas. In other words, let's buy the universities. Of course, the idea of benevolent dictatorship employing the best talents and directing them in the service of the nation has been proven time and time again. Nepotism? Tush and nonsense. Greed never even occurs. Don't believe me? Just take a look at the USA at present. We're watching a masterclass in politics for profit as the president, his family, his son-in-law, and his associates gorge themselves in opportunities for self-enrichment, and I am not going to criticize them. Donald Trump won the election, and by his reckoning, that gives him power. It is up to the US courts and Constitution to stop him. That's what the Constitution is there for. At the same time, though, anyone daring to find fault in the Trumps treating the economy as their personal piggy bank are finding the state quickly mobilized against them. Now, monarchy is a fascinating concept, but the reason the world got rich these past 300 years was largely due to democracy and capitalism, where the rights of the many triumphed over the rights of the few. And that is going to remain the case in the future, in my humble opinion. Anyway, that's enough morning porridge for this morning. Out of time, back to my day job. Have a great weekend. If you want to get the morning porridge first thing each morning, sign up on the website, www.morningporridge.com. This video usually follows some time later whenever I get a chance to record it. Thank you all very much for your attention, and I'll be back next week with whatever else is dominating thinking in global markets.